Welcome to the podcast, Martha. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Leah. I'm excited to dig in.
Awesome. Well, I would love if we could start with hearing a little bit about you and your personal story with food and body, movement, maybe as much as you're comfortable getting into.
Yeah, for sure. I can kind of give a little bit of the background. It's interesting. I mean, I'm somebody who continually likes to psychoanalyze myself, so it's always good as you kind of do these kind of learnings to rethink through some of your own narratives and everything. So for me, I think one of the really helpful things is that in my youth growing up, I was exposed to a lot of different ways to be a woman in the world. I lived in small towns, I lived in bigger towns, I was exposed to living in the city, and also like rural community where I was exposed to kind of more hippie alternative lifestyle type of folks, which was such a breadth of experience, I think, compared to a lot of people, which I think set me up for a little bit more critical thinking, navigating my own journey through adolescence and into adulthood and making sense of like what the heck it means to be a woman in the world. And through some of those early exposures, like, I mean, I remember reading The Beauty Myth and talking about how, the control of women is so tightly linked with dieting and thin beauty standards. I remember reading that when I was like 17 or 18. And so, like, these kind of challenging of conventional narratives were kind of in the mix from the beginning. But then, my early career, I was 18 when I started working in a gym. It was my first like full-time job, mostly working at the front desk to start with. And that was this exposure to this aesthetically focused world that I really hadn't been exposed to before. I wasn't an athletic kid, like I didn't grow up on sports teams or anything. I didn't really have a sense of myself as aesthetic. And I wasn't really like the idea of trying to look like people in magazines basically didn't cross my mind because nobody that I had ever met in my life looked like that. So it didn't even cross my mind to try to look like that. So then all of a sudden being in this kind of fitness world was a little bit of a tricky thing to navigate because on one hand, I felt like, oh, this is awesome. It feels good to be strong. And like, when you're going to fitness classes, you don't have to be the best person in the class. Like you're not trying to get picked first for a sports team. There's this strength side that felt really good and felt really energizing and also fun and community and all of that. But also this tension around, the focus on making yourself smaller and more beautiful and sort of this aesthetic focus. And, I'd flip through the magazines at the front desk and it would be like, women's health, and it would be like 10 ways to make your meal healthier. And they were all about eating less. And so these narratives around fitness were very much linked with dieting and, controlling what's in your body. And so my journey with that kind of was also in parallel to becoming a personal trainer, working with more people and hearing about their journeys with exercise and eating and body, and then my own learning journey as well, taking courses in sports and exercise psychology, and then eventually positive psychology and coaching psychology. So that there was like definitely I fell into the pit of diet culture and trying to change the body and look a certain way, and a lot of the narratives that are so common in the fitness industry of like your body is your business card and all of these things that are so toxic to anyone engaging in the fitness industry and can be even more so to the fitness professionals that are in there, right? So just like in dietetics, there's a lot of people who fall into this line of work because they're working through their own sort of dysfunction in those areas. So I think all of that's related. And I started to see these dynamics where the people who are really focused on aesthetics would kind of always be on and off the wagon of, these really intense bouts of exercise and kind of these sort of crash diets.
Mhm.
And then it would like be totally not sustainable. It would crash. And then and that sort of cycle of on again, off again being generally tied with dieting as well as exercise attempts. So I definitely saw that. I engaged in a certain amount of that myself, but there was always part of me that was like, what are we doing here? Right? Like this can't be all that we want to do with our lives. And then so I started to get exposed to these ideas of diet culture and the fact that um, exercise, A, doesn't lead to weight loss, and B, diets don't work. And, n not only do they not give you what they say they're going to, it's generally the opposite, and then continues that alienation from your body. And so I was really passionate about this idea of, well, what's the version of exercise that fits in with this model of, I was learning all about intuitive eating and ditching diet culture. And a lot of those approaches don't have a whole ton about the exercise part of it. That it's generally, it's kind of like stop exercising, exercise doesn't lead to weight loss, and really like only do stuff that's like fun and joyful. And that's great. But for people who really like exercise, which was always me, like, and going through that process myself, I did need a break from more structured exercise to kind of rebuild some of those foundations. Um, but I think a lot of people who are very active, like there's a coming back around of, okay, how can I bring this back into my life that isn't in that disrupted, disconnected, and or disordered way? And so that was sort of this concept that I had. I called it at first fitness mindset, and it was a lot about the beliefs that we have about exercise, like what it is, what it's for, and what our relationship to it is. And that was sort of like the big question in my mind when I did my master's, which was in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, was like, where's the version of exercise that's about promoting well-being, like whole person well-being? And I found this area of research on positive embodiment. So this had grown up from research by Neva Piran and her colleagues that was starting with qualitative studies of like, what does it mean to be a body across the lifespan? And looking at women and girls through the lifespan, really through following them for 5 years through the period of adolescence, studies with young women and studies with older women. And what they found is that all of the ways in which we exist as a body in the world are not separate. So your relationship with food is not separate from your relationship with exercise. It's not separate from your capacity to feel your body sensations and to attune to those with care. It's not separate from your comfort to take up space and use your agency and use your voice, not separate from how we experience gender and sexuality and objectification in the world, and how we're living either with our body as an object or living subjectively, really present in our own physical reality. And this dynamic of is the relationship with the body across all of these domains coming from a place of freedom, or is it coming from a place of control?
Mm.
And I was like, yes, absolutely that. That's not only my personal experience, that like you can't separate and tease out just one of these areas. They're so enmeshed. But it really echoed what I saw with the, hundreds of personal training clients and group fitness members and people who had trusted me to support them with their own journey with their body and their own journey with exercise over, 2 decades of a career. Um, and I was like, yeah, that's the thing. And so what I did on the research side was look at positive embodiment and how that relates to well-being. So psychological well-being and mindful self-care behaviors and all of these other positive dimensions of mental health, including intuitive exercise, self-compassion, um, positive affect, life satisfaction. And what we found is that your relationship to your body, the nature of your relationship to your body is inextricable from your ability to experience well-being. in your
Mm.
life, to view your life overall as positive. And I was like, yeah, this is such a thing that like nobody is talking about. That when we experience this disruption at the level of the body, it's not just vanity or like, oh, you're trying to look good and you're sad that maybe you don't meet that standard. It's so fundamental to the way that we move through the world and the way that we want to live our lives. So like my own personal journey followed this arc of like generally good when I was younger, then a period of disruption, and then a big chunk of learning, and then integration, which I think is the journey that so many of us go on. It's like, when we're young, for the most part, we're unself-conscious about these things. We generally eat naturally and want to move and explore the world. And then society and all of these messages that we receive from all of these different places chime in, and there's a period of disruption for almost everybody. And then we can choose to, when we decide that that doesn't work anymore, that doesn't fit, go through a period of learning, and whether that's, working on the exercise side or working with somebody like you on intuitive eating, and all of these, other ways of learning with podcast books and all of that to kind of like tease out some of these beliefs and dynamics that are in the system so that we can stop blaming ourselves for a system that was actually never designed for our well-being and then come out the other side, you know, integrated. So, yeah.
So much, so many thoughts. I love the way you just summarized all of that so beautifully. One thought that's coming up is the part of your story where you're like, I didn't even know it was a thing to try and be like, oh, let me look like someone else or let me strive for a certain kind of body. That just really struck me. Like, I think about if social media wasn't a thing, if like advertising and marketing, like there wouldn't maybe be this sense of like, I need to try and look like someone else or I need to have that feature. It'd be more of like this just acceptance of like, yeah, people are different heights, people are different in everything, there's all these other different features. And I think the lines get so blurred now because it's like you kind of can change some of these things with like plastic surgery and I don't know, Botox and all those kinds of things, which it's it can feel like I don't know, maybe you
Yeah.
can try and look like the people you're seeing online or at the gym or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that like ramping up of like the degree of body modification that is seen as normal and you know required societally, right? It's
Yeah.
like not only are we expected to be like whatever 100 years ago you're going to be bathed and dressed in mostly clean clothes to like okay, and now the clothes should be fashionable and like new, and also like all of the expectations and the way that we're kind of encultured to see our natural physical self as wrong
Hmm.
and in need of continual repair and then maintenance,
Yeah.
right? And so this is like that normative discontent and the idea that it's so normalized, especially for women, to dislike your body.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
like that's the baseline is, oh, everybody dislikes their body, but it's not just like, okay, well, my body is what it is and we move on with it. Now you've got this like plethora of things that you can do. And like, it's like, and then you gotta tan and you gotta do the hair removal and you've got to do the injections and you've got to have an $800 hair dryer and you've got to, you
Yeah.
know, do all of these things just to have a baseline.
Hmm.
And then even when we can achieve something close to the societal standard, and that's a big if, very, very many people are not going to even get close to that. But even if you can, it doesn't feel real because
Hmm.
you constantly have to maintain it. And you know what it took to get there. So if somebody's like, oh, wow, you look so great, you're like, yeah. And I had all of these X, Y, and Z things that I had to do to get here. And I have to continually maintain,
Right.
not to mention our bodies change and weight
And the
fluctuates in
standards change.
And the
Right when you get to
standards
the thing, they're like,
change.
actually, that's not in anymore.
Absolutely, right? Like I know for me, I grew up I was in high school in like the late 90s, very early 2000s, where it's like the beauty standard was like very thin, thigh gap, big fake boobs was like, the thing. And then all of a sudden when I was in university, it like shifted to the opposite, which was like, the hips and thighs and whatever. And it's just like this is just roulette. We're rolling the dice on whatever happens to be quote unquote in fashion. And I think that that's so demeaning to the complexity of who we are as human beings to put something like your body as like a fashion du jour measuring tape,
Hmm.
right? Like yeah, the goal is always moving and our bodies are always changing. Maybe something that we could achieve close to a certain beauty standard in our 20s is no longer achievable in our 40s, probably not in our 60s, certainly not in our 70s and 80s.
Right.
So when do we decide, you know what, I'm gonna unplug from the matrix here
Yeah.
and like that this was never for me.
Something that comes up as one of the biggest tensions to this idea is like, I find I work with clients and they're like, yeah, I see. This is the matrix. Like, this is the patriarchy. This is so screwed up. And this is the way things are. This is a way of attaining social status and social currency. And the tension I often see is like, I want to unplug from this, and the cost feels too high of like what I might lose, how I might not be taken as seriously in the workplace or in the dating scene or, whatever it is. I know this is such a big question, but because you've shared so many beautiful words on the ideas of like beauty in general, do you have any thoughts on how to navigate that tension?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is about navigating the tension and that it's not about having like, you know, if we've been all the way over here on one side, we're probably not going to overnight with information and insight swing all the way to the other side. I think it's really, and I'm sure that you work through this with your clients, it's this gradual unpicking and unpacking of things piece by piece and knowing that you deserve to do that work and to do it at your own pace and then decide like what your boundaries are of what you feel comfortable with. I know for me, because I'm a parent of a daughter, I'm like, would I want to do anything to my body that I would feel that I wouldn't want to have to explain that to my child, right? And would I want them to feel like that was something wrong with them to have to change? That's something that comes up for me, but that's different for everybody,
Hmm.
right? And depending on what your start point is, maybe it's beginning to let go of the things that are actually not in your control, but that feel like they sort of could be, right? When we accept that, like, if you look at large scale meta-analysis, exercise does not lead to weight loss. Um, and so, oh, okay, knowing that, then that's an invitation to shift that relationship when scientifically it doesn't work that way. I think people gravitate more to different ways of knowing. In the book, I call it kind of this, there's this like really big pivotal switch when you feel it's like head, heart, and gut are like super aligned. And it's like cognitively, like the research on dieting and weight stigma and that exercise doesn't lead to weight loss. You understand that there is a science-based side to it. In your heart, you know that like these are systems that oppress people, that cause harm to myself and to people that I love, and I don't want to be part of it. And with your gut, you know that that's in line with what your personal story is. And you're like, yeah, you know what? Every single time I tried to lose weight with diet and exercise, it worked for a little bit and then it came back. And you can resolve all of these all at one time. And I think that for so many people, when they all click, it's like, well, there's no point going back. Which doesn't mean that you never have moments of, body thoughts or, food habits creep in. It makes sense that we have them so we can have such a tremendous amount of self-compassion for ourselves in
Mhm.
that struggle.
Yeah.
Um, and then, navigating what feels okay and not okay. That like, for me, it's like, oh yeah, I styled my hair. I put on a little bit of makeup today. I'm okay with that. But I'm going to set a boundary of like, I'm not going to set the expectation that I always have makeup on before I leave the house.
Right.
That to me is too far. But
Yeah.
for somebody else who is used to wearing, full face of makeup all the time, that might feel like it's too far. So you have to stay in the zone that's comfortable.
Mhm.
That for me is like not a big stretch. Even when I do wear makeup, it's minimal. And for some people, makeup can be expression and freedom and all of
Mhm.
that too. So it's so nuanced and so personal.
Yeah.
Um, but I think when we zoom way out, that gives us so much insight, right? And it's just like, you mentioned like the dating scene, and it's like, yeah, if you have to look a certain way to attract somebody, is that the person that you want to
Right.
be with if they wouldn't be with you otherwise,
Yeah.
right? Because our bodies are going to change through our lifespan.
Right. Yeah, I love that you say it's nuanced and personal. You have to create your own boundaries and see, yeah, for someone, makeup might feel like this is what I need to do to be valid. For someone else, it might be a fun art form of, self-expression. I also am thinking about like power and privilege, like people with multiple marginalized identities. Yeah, it might be a form of safety for them for have to, you know, do things that more so make them meet up with the beauty ideals because society is already like kind of has them knocked down in a place of, you know, power and privilege because of all the different ways that our society can treat marginalized identities. So I'm thinking that plays in too with like it being nuanced and personal. Like, yeah, it might be a form of safety or survival. And that doesn't mean that you're like bad at, body acceptance or like that you're like, like succumbing to the patriarchy. Like, I think there's a world in which you do these things and you're like, I know that I'm part of this is because of bullshit standards, and this is just what I need to do to feel okay and safe right now. And I think so much of it is just the awareness instead of like the mindless, like not examining the behavior and not examining like where does this come from? Why do I feel like I have to do all of these rituals and grooming things? And um yeah, I think for someone who this feels like, oh my gosh, but like I get Botox and I do my nails and I do all these things, it's like that's okay. But like maybe the teeniest, tiniest step is thinking about, well, what if you didn't? Or where does this come from? And even just toying with some some of these ideas without even necessarily changing anything.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It's all about bringing curiosity to it, right? I
Hmm.
think that, like, yeah, it's true. We live in a super fat phobic society. We live in a super ageist society. We live in so many systems of hierarchies that are frequently at the level of the body, right? That, like, yeah, some people do have more space to challenge those norms. And for all of us, there might be areas that we can slowly start to explore,
Hmm.
right? That it's like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, be like, well, what if I didn't? Or what's my relationship to this thing? And at what point do I, decide that either that's enough or, you know, so many people will have those guidelines for themselves of like, okay, I'll do Botox, but I'm not going to do plastic surgery or
Hmm.
whatever. And there's no judgment against individuals who choose to do these things.
Right.
In the society that we're in, that is the most likely scenario that we at the very least feel the pressure to do those things. And some of us do. What I have a huge questioning of is the systems that tell us that
Yes.
that has value
Right.
and that continues to place value on bodily perfectionism and embodied perfectionism and a continuing relationship of control with all facets of the body that lead us to a place of being very disembodied
Yeah.
and disconnected from what the physiological self actually feels.
This distinction is so important. It's like the judgment is not on the individual for, getting Botox or wearing makeup or being on a GLP-1 or whatever the thing is that you're doing. It's at the system that makes you feel like you have to do that. And like you're saying, that makes these things out to be ways of like attaining power and status. So important. I was just it's a whole rabbit hole, but I was a part of this debate against Jillian Michaels, do you know her?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And as a fitness person, that was a just wild experience. But um, today, the episode that went live on the podcast was about addressing some of the most common comments I got from the debate. And one thing I said in the debate was that I don't promote intentional weight loss because I believe that's unethical. And the thing I got like slammed with in the comments is people being like, basically like misconstruing that and saying like, you're saying that like it's unethical if I want to lose weight. And I'm like, no, no, no. Like, you're not an unethical person. You're not a morally less than person. I'm saying as a provider who's wanting to create safety and have the best interests of the client in mind, um, for the long term, I find that to be unethical. And it's like
Yeah.
that there's a difference. Like you're not a bad person or an unethical person if you have the desire to lose weight or even if you've acted on it. In fact, like of course, like I understand, right? Because of all of these things you and I have talked about so far in this episode and more. But again, yeah, I take issue with the system and also the providers in promoting it, to be honest. Like, and that might be
Yeah.
a little harsher, but yeah, that distinction feels very top of mind for me right now after recording that episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's such a matter of like when you know better, do better.
Mhm.
And if you start out in a field, whether dietetics or fitness or whatever, and it makes sense that your first way of doing things is the status quo. And then it's like when you receive more information, right? You learn about health at every size, or you learn about these large scale meta-analysis that like dieting doesn't work and exercise for weight loss doesn't work, and that there's these multi-billion dollar industries that profit from something because they make you a repeat customer rather than give you the thing that they say that they will. Like, I also landed at that place of like, this isn't ethical. That like, if somebody comes and says, one wants to do exercise and they're like, oh, I want to lose some weight. It's like, okay, well, exercise probably won't do that. We
Right.
can focus on getting stronger
Yeah.
and
Getting your
feeling
stamina
better in your
up,
body.
having
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not actually a component of fitness. Your body size isn't. We measure fitness by like cardiovascular capacity, strength, flexibility, endurance. Like your body weight just is what it is and let it be what it wants to be, kind of thing. I mean, I think that the whole idea that, yeah, it's not saying that people who want that are unethical. I think it's the way that the industry does things. There's a real lack of informed consent,
hmm
right? To know that, like, you know, it's like if somebody came to you and they're like, you know what, Leah, I'm going to start smoking because I think it's going to be really good for my health. I think it's going to actually be like super good for my breathing capacity because this is how cigarettes used to be marketed.
Yeah.
As a provider, would be like, okay, so A, not only does it not give you that,
hmm
B, it's most likely going to give you the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like yeah, intentional
No,
weight loss
no,
is
but
the
that's such
same.
a good example. I'm thinking of how layered this is because
Yeah.
it's like the we are all subject to the messaging and the marketing. So like back in the cigarette days, where they were wait, were they really saying it will increase your lung capacity?
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
and there was ads that were like smoke camels while you're pregnant because a low birth weight will be so much easier for you.
oh my God. Okay. Well, I'm just thinking like how layered this is because it's like
No.
that marketing is compelling. So even the doctors in that case who should ethically be know to say, no, this is harmful until they kind of crack the code of the matrix and realize, oh no, this is about money and marketing and consumerism or whatever it was about back then in the cigarette case. Like they are subject to that marketing too, just like now the fitness instructors, the nutrition professionals are subject to diet culture and the very compelling ads and everything too. So it's like you're saying, when you know better, do better. Like I believe ethically, because of what I've seen, the meta-analysis, the personal stories in my life, in my clients, all the clients I support, I cannot support intentional weight loss. I can support someone who desires that because of course you do, and we can understand what are you actually desiring and all that. But yeah, it's once you know, you can't unknow that like this just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think too, I think what you're describing really points to the fact of like finding the right professional,
Hmm.
right? That like exactly like your doctors or your chiropractors or whoever you go to for your health information, they're kind of swimming in the soup of diet culture as well.
Yeah.
And when it's not their specialty, um, you know, it's going to default to societal norms. It's like I've had a dentist who recommended keto. I've had, like, I had a naturopath who put me on such a restrictive diet that it almost led me into disordered eating because it was so, you know, so far removed from intuitive eating and so restrictive,
Yeah.
right? And so finding the right professionals is really helpful.
Yeah.
And and I think for people that are in those professions, like dietetics or fitness or whatever, we can cling to the old narratives out of defensiveness,
Hmm.
right? Because it's like, if you've made your living, you've worked with hundreds of people and you've been supporting them in something that now you've learned is either doesn't deliver long term or is harmful, that's a lot of cognitive dissonance. And
Right.
so people are very committed to kind of keeping going in the direction
Doubling down.
that they are and double down on it, right? And
Yeah.
so it can be really sticky for those reasons.
Yeah. This happened where I went to undergrad. There was a professor who like whole career was in quote unquote obesity research. And then the director of the dietetics program was like, we're transitioning this whole program to be weight inclusive, non-diet, health at every size aligned. And I'm not sure what happened. I think they maybe ended up having to like let that professor go because it's like your life's work like fundamentally is at odds with what the mission of the curriculum. Um, so yeah, it can so much identity can be wrapped up, whether it's like what you're doing professionally, like from research or personal training with the promise of weight loss or nutrition coaching with the promise of weight loss. And it's really freaking hard and brave, like what you did to switch around and be like, actually, scratch that. Like I saw the data and I can't go back. And so I want to pivot to talk more specifically about attuned exercise. So you wrote this
Yeah.
great book. You've described like where the motivation came from of like a lot of these frameworks focus more on food, healing your relationship with food. There's way less out there on healing your relationship with exercise. So can we start by having you define what is attuned exercise?
Yeah. So attuned exercise is paying attention to what your physiological state is and what your body is feeling, and caring about that before, during, and after exercise. So paying attention to what feels good, what feels enjoyable, what feels sustainable. So it's specifically an anti-diet ethos. So it's moving away from um, exercise for aesthetic goals, weight goals, and it's also away from other fitness beliefs that are part of the system as well. Like, I mean, I can call it toxic fitness culture, whatever. I think it's an arm of diet culture, but it's also has some of its own distinct things. And this is like the like no pain, no gain, and beliefs about what kind of exercise counts and doesn't count. The ideas that we beliefs that we have around exercise intensity, how much, how often, what type of exercise that we should do and quote unquote should do. And just unpicking and unpacking that and making way for something that's more sustainable, that's about feeling good, and that may give you some of those fitness and health benefits, but it's not the only thing that it gives you. It also gives you a space to practice and build the habit of attunement, of paying attention to what your bodily cues are and what your thoughts and feelings that emerge around these things that can in turn positively impact the rest of your life.
Mm, so beautiful. So, one of the aspects of attuned exercise that I think is most interesting is this idea of like self-compassion and how much that's really at odds with the mainstream ways of talking about exercise in terms of like no pain, no gain. It's all about like do it tired, do it at all costs. Like doesn't matter if you have to sacrifice sleep or social life or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about how control and self-punishment are often mistaken as health and how some of the research on how like self-compassion might actually be more supportive to a person's relationship with movement?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk a little bit about like that no pain, no gain version first. So what tends to happen in that dynamic is that it's very focused on external goals. So it's an outwardly defined outcome. So it's either a specific body, it's a glamorized, health status, or a specific weight lifted or a sports event, whatever. So there's an outcome. So it's an extrinsic motivation, which when we're looking at sources of motivation, it's energy expensive to keep working on a goal that's about following this external thing.
Mm,
And so attuned exercise is about finding a more aligned and like connected to self version of exercise that has components of intrinsic motivation, so the stuff that we already like and would be doing anyway. And maybe all that it takes in terms of motivation is like a little bit of planning. So, say you love dancing, but you're not making time for it in your life. You don't need motivation to do dancing. You just need a little bit of like
like
scheduling
logistics, yeah.
permission slip. Like there's a logistics, yeah, side of it. But it doesn't require heaps of motivation to do it. And then for the rest of any other fitness things that you do, it's very integrated with your vision of yourself so that there is like it is aligned for you both short term and long term. And I think that that's where a lot of traditional fitness is like suffer now, enjoy it later. But when? Like, what is the point where you get to just enjoy it and it's okay, right? And I think that we can put these like intense amount of motivation into specific goals, or that it's a marathon or it's P90X or it's 75 hard. Maybe you can push through that or a portion of that, but that's going to run out when life gets lifey. You've got a kid who called sick from school, or you've got, an aging parent, or you have to move cities and you've had a big job
Or an
disruption,
injury.
or an injury, or an illness, or just extra stress in your life, or you're struggling with your mental health. All of that is going to be like gone, and
Hmm.
it's out the window, and we only have room for that version of exercise if like everything else in life is pretty low key. I think it's also just part of the way that our society glamorizes suffering for things, and that like, yeah, of course it takes this like really extreme up at 4 a.m. and crushing it for 2 hours, and then I'm going to work for 12 hours, and you know what I mean? Like it's just like everything is like maximum intensity, and that's very glamorized. I think that like what we're doing with attuned exercise is like what actually fits your life right now, your actual right now life, your actual right now body, and really shift towards sustainability so that movement, the stuff that you do, like very, very little of it should ever feel like taking your medicine. Maybe if you have like rehab exercises for an injury or post-surgery or something where it feels like, okay, I have to be a little bit disciplined with that. That
Hmm.
should be the most, and it should be the smallest portion of what your movement life looks like. And
Hmm.
so it's inviting in a little bit more of the things that you would do for free anyway, right? Like maybe it's, I'm going to go for a walk with a friend a couple times this week or whatever, or, I want to do hiking or the types of things that you just love. And then maybe some of the things that you've not enjoyed in the past, it's not necessarily that you hate that thing, you hate the way that you were taught to relate to it.
Right.
So I use like strength training as an example. Like I know some people like I hate strength training. Like it sucks when I'm doing it. My muscles are so sore. And it's like, yeah, if the only way that you've been taught to do strength training is every exercise for 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps, yeah, that's awful. If I did that, I would hate it too, right? Like you have to start simpler, start easier so that you can start to build more positive associations with
Hmm.
exercise so that it becomes something that it's not a should anymore. It's something that is worth coming back to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about the person who's like, but I like the challenge. I like the exterior. Like, I want to get my marathon time down. I want to see myself lift more weight and whatever. But also, I don't want to devolve into bullying myself and disordered eating in this toxic relationship. Do you think there's a world in which you can have both?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. And I think that like that's the space for nuance, right? And I think that was one of the things that I think was important to me with writing the book is that if you can navigate that, not only can you have some structured exercise in your life, if you enjoy that, you can actually have room for goals and room for,
Hmm.
some things that you enjoy, but the way that you approach them is so different.
Hmm.
Yeah, and like I'd say the people that I talk to about attuned exercise, like they kind of fall into like three rough categories. One is people who've never had a consistent relationship with exercise and have super low self-efficacy in themselves as an exerciser. So they've probably tried a bunch of things for very short periods of time, but never in a way that they were able to make it a consistent habit. But there's a second group that is like, I'll call them like the glory days or like the golden past, where it's like maybe they were on a sports team, maybe they were like an athlete in college or in high school or whatever. So they have this like way back version of themselves as an exerciser, but can't adjust where they are currently. And then there's people who really like exercise, have exercised for a long time, and have typically been in that high intensity sort of, either recreational athlete or maybe even a professional athlete or just like intensely active person, but that maybe is like wants to figure out that relationship. And so that's figuring out, well, like when is a good time to push versus not push? Like, am I well fed and not injured and not letting my self-worth and sense of self be too tied up in the outcome of this thing,
Yeah.
right? And if you're doing that and that you're ensuring your physical safety in terms of eating enough, resting enough, and you're not injured or dealing with physiological problems, and you're not like your ego isn't so tied to it that you're going to be risking hurting yourself, then go for it. That's awesome. That's a great space to be in, right? And so I think that that's, for those folks, it's not about and I think that that's where like, a book about intuitive eating that is just like, well, toss structured exercise falls short for those people.
Yeah, and it feels like a real loss because they're like, wait, I love I love challenging myself and that is part of how they find meaning in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think what I've seen is like a little bit like separate your identity from the
Mm,
exercise piece can be a helpful thing.
yeah.
That like, it's great to have these goals, but if it's going to be like a huge crash out if you can't do it or don't feel like doing it, then that's a sign that like maybe something's a little bit out of balance. Like I talk to a lot of people, maybe they've done, marathons or an ultra marathon and then they're kind of burnt out after. And then there's this like almost existential crisis of like, well, am I even a runner if I'm not running right now and I really don't want to run right now and I feel like crap.
Mm,
And there's that component of it when a lot of identity has been wrapped up in a particular activity, a particular level of performance, that can be tricky to navigate, right? And like maybe there's grief that that way of doing things doesn't fit. Maybe there's a physiological side of like you literally just haven't given yourself enough time to recover yet.
right.
Yeah,
So
and
if
there's
people,
nuance.
totally, if people start to get behind a more kind of compassionate, gentle relationship with movement, and they worry that, okay, if I'm not forcing myself and taking this like no pain, no gain attitude, what if I just never exercise? What if what if that means that I'm not motivated? What if I stop moving altogether? Can you talk a little bit about what you found actually happens when people approach exercise with more attunement and compassion?
Yeah. So I think yeah, we have this belief that like if I'm not hard on myself, I won't do anything.
Hmm.
And then it's like, fine, then let yourself do nothing for a little while and see how that feels. And when you've had a chance to a little bit, separate the self-worth, and I mean, this with intuitive eating, there's this huge like morality piece that is part of the burden that we have when in our relationship with food and with exercise, right? That it's just like, I'm not a bad person, I'm not good enough if I'm not, pushing myself or doing these things. And so working with a little bit of those dynamics, whether that's building some self-compassion and just like, okay, maybe we've learned that you know how to do 10 out of 10 on the intensity scale. We know that you know how to do that. You know how to push yourself to 10 out of 10. Let's see, can you do 6 out of 10? Can we do 3 out of 10? Can we do like we want to have range,
Yeah.
right? And so, and that can be a good way to challenge things gently. So as we work through, this is for so many people, it's the work of our lives to learn how to be more self-compassionate, to respond to ourselves the way that we would respond to, one of our friends in our lives, right? If one of your friends is like, oh, like I feel like I want to stop kicking my ass about working out, but like then I feel like I'm going to be a bad person. You'd be like, girl, no. Like obviously your self-worth is not has nothing and how much we love you and how much we care,
Right.
like is not about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But for ourselves, there's all of this burden, right? So if we can work with that a little bit to have just a little bit of spaciousness and
Hmm.
then work on tuning that dial of like, okay, can I go into this, workout with like, I'm gonna go 7 out of 10
Hmm.
or I'm going to try 3 out of 10 and just start to pay attention to what different types of intensities feel like in your body. That can
Yeah.
be a really good place to start with attunement because a lot of us are used to when we go into a bout of exercise to basically try to dissociate as much as possible, push your body as hard as you can, and then like there we go.
Hmm.
Right? So just to bring your attention to your body and periodically be like, okay, if you're jogging, be like, what effort does this feel like on a scale of one
Yeah.
to 10? What am I enjoying it?
Yeah. And that's
How
also
do I feel? Yeah.
it's becoming kind of popularized with running right now of like with heart rate zones, like, not saying that like that data is necessarily helpful for everyone, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot in the running community now of like stay in zone one, stay in zone two, which means like, yeah, it should be easier. It should be like medium, now you're pushing. So I love that advice. I think about with self-compassion, like two things that I'm pulling out from what you're saying. One is like, okay, so if you stop forcing yourself and you don't exercise, see how you feel. Maybe you'll get sick of like being, more sedentary and feel like, oh, I kind of want to like go on a little walk or like, do
Yeah.
something active. And but that's so cool because it would come from inside. It would be like a genuine desire. And we see this with food too. It's like, okay, yeah, have fast food every day, truly. Like it's okay. And often people are like, oh, after a few days of doing that, I'm like kind of genuinely craving a fruit or vegetable, something hydrating, something with roughage and fiber. But the difference is that feeling arises from within versus, well, I should be having fruits and vegetables. And when it comes from within, it is so much more powerful and sustainable.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I think that like just like with intuitive eating, when people feel that if they stop controlling what they eat, they're going to eat nothing but, you know, quote unquote junk food. I don't
Yeah.
subscribe to that label, but that's what people will say. Just like people have that belief, you know, that can be challenged to be like, really, okay, if you're going to start intuitive eating, are you going to go and buy a box of 50 donuts and eat only donuts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next like 3 days? And they're like, no. It's like, okay, so and maybe it's not as big of a fear as we think.
Hmm.
With exercise, it's like if you give yourself that permission slip to not do it, are you never going to move again? I think where exercise difference from is different from eating is that you can't, it's the whole thing. You can't quit food.
Hmm.
Like you you will have a naturally occurring iterative process about it. And just because you haven't figured it all out and you know shed all of the diet culture thoughts or the self-talk or whatever, you get like forever more tries, right? There's this naturally iterative process. I think what happens with exercise is people feel like, well, I'm not ready for it. And then because I went and then I had a negative self-thought, so like I'm going to still have more space. I think that one of the things that we need to do is to give ourselves a little bit of a chance to have an iterative relationship with movement, right? That it's like when yeah, if you are sitting around all day, you do feel kind of crappy and you're like, okay, yeah, I want to do something. I'm like, but you could. You could never go for a walk around your neighborhood is a possibility.
Yeah.
The way that like never eating is not a possibility,
Right.
right? So I do think that there is a bit of a divergence there that like give yourself a break and then give yourself some space to explore and
Hmm.
some curiosity
Yeah.
of like if I go for a walk around my block a couple times per week, how does that affect how I feel? And do I notice that there's a shift in my mood? Do I notice that I feel any different in my body? Right. And then in terms of like how we relate to intensity, right? It's like start with kind of the low-hanging fruit. It is like a really good place to start. And I mean, one of the things that I've seen with so many of the like, people in the online space who were talking about, fitness professionals that found out about anti-diet and whatever, is so many of us, and myself included, took a long break from structured exercise.
Hmm.
And, now or over the past few years, I'd be like, okay, now I'm ready to have a little bit more structure and it doesn't have the same flavor as it did in a different chapter. So giving yourself that sense that like it can be different and that
Right.
a different way to relate to this thing is possible. And yeah, there's hope for it to be a different kind of way.
I often think about specifically needing a break from the specific kind of movement that you were burned by. Like for me, it was the elliptical. Like that was just like, okay, it was so rote. Like I have to be on the elliptical for this amount of time to burn this amount of calories. I don't think I've ever stepped foot back on an elliptical since
Yeah.
I took space from it, and that's okay. But another thing I took space from was running, and I have returned to it. And it, like you're saying, it looks really different. The intention is really different. The nature of intensity and sort of the stakes of running feel very different. So I've had both experiences, and I think, yeah, both are okay. You might never want to return to the specific type of movement that you were burned by, and you might miss it and find a way to return to it with a new outlook.
Yeah, exactly, right? And if you do return to something that was maybe problematic or dysfunctional at a different chapter and some of that stuff emerges, it doesn't mean that you can't do that thing ever, right? That
Right.
you can start to build trust and explore like the ways of doing things, right? Like for so many people, it's like, yeah, the cardio machines can be part of that, right? Where it's just like, but if you like some aspect of it, of like, oh, I liked how I felt, it's like the quote unquote hacks or the shifts can be so easy. It's like one of the things I started doing. I've always liked, walking on the treadmill or doing a jog on the treadmill. Like some people hate the treadmill. I don't mind it.
Hmm.
When
Yeah,
I did
everyone's
running, I
different.
did, yeah, everyone's different, but I don't wear my watch all the time so that it's not telling me, how many steps or how many calories or my speed. And I put a towel over the display. So the only thing I can see is my speed so that I can like adjust to what feels comfortable. And that works, right? And you're like, oh, who knew that the only adjustment was I'm going to put a towel over the
Right. I think
display?
people
Like
do
it's
that.
so, yeah, it's so like low tech, right? Or maybe it's if you go for a walk with somebody or you go for a run, it's like, well, I'm not going to measure every single run.
Hmm.
Or, you know, or it might be the other way of like you mentioned before of like, oh, I'm going to actually use my heart rate monitor and I'm going to try to stay in this low intensity.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
I have three sort of rapid fire questions to round things out. The
sure.
first is what if people take one thing from your work, your more specifically your book, what do you hope that they take?
What I hope they take is that there's hope. If you've struggled with your relationship with exercise and your body, there is a different way, there's a different path. And if the times that you've explored exercise have left you feeling less than or in tension with your body and yourself, there's a different way that you are welcome to explore.
I love that. I ask these two questions to everyone who comes on the podcast. The first is, what's your current biggest diet culture or movement culture pet peeve?
That's a good one. Um, anything that's talking about skinny being back in. Anything that is glamorizing a particular body type. The idea that fit has a look and that fitness and movement is only for people who are already fit
Yeah,
and look a certain way.
right. I'm thinking like the matching set and like all the Pilates kind of like visuals online, and it's like a thin white girl who like is like conventionally attractive, and it totally there's so much messaging that there's a certain look. That's a pet peeve of mine too. That's a good one. The last question I love to ask people is, I'm an intuitive eating dietitian. We're talking about even like intuitive movement and the the opposite of dieting, restricting, being going inwards and seeing what does my body want to eat? How does it want to move? How does this feel? And so I got really interested in this question of like, what is intuition? What does it mean to you? And how do you experience?
That's a really good question. I think that being able to notice what is happening inside you, both physiologically as well as emotionally and psychologically. So, I'll just give an example. If somebody says, "Hey, Leah, do you want to come try this Pilates class with me?" What's the feeling in your body? Does it feel like yes, no, curious, like ooh, like what's the general vibe of what you feel, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to have an exact name. I like the idea of like what's the general vibe? Does it sound like yuck or does it sound like yum? Does it sound like maybe if it's with the right friend? And when I say, "Hey, Leah, do you want to go come try Pilates?" What are the emotions that come up for you, and what are the thoughts that come up for you? For some people, it might be like, "Oh, I don't have the right clothes for that," or like, "I don't want to go if it's all going to be skinny white girls," or, whatever those thoughts that come up are, and whatever the emotions that come up are, and the general vibe of what your physiological self is saying, I think those are all worth paying attention to. And they could be called intuition. They could be called your self-knowledge. They're the window into knowing yourself better. And I think that we can live better and more meaningful lives when we know ourselves better and can meet ourselves with compassion. And that doesn't mean that everything that we think or feel or a knee-jerk response is right. Maybe it's a really inclusive Pilates class and it's got
Yeah.
instructors and members who are all different body types and all different abilities. And maybe it's like a super wonderful, awesome Pilates class, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're right, but it gives you information about like, oh, there's something in the system here.
Hmm.
So I think that intuition is paying attention to what's happening on the inside and not just performing something on the outside. And it can be as simple as noticing, am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I comfortable in my clothing? Does this feel like a good fit for me today?
Beautiful. So beautiful and well said. Well, Martha, where can people find you to stay connected or learn more about your work or buy your book?
Yeah, so attunedexercise.com is going to be probably the best start point. On there, if you sign up for my mailing list, I've got a free workbook to start to explore your own relationship with exercise so people can jump on that if they're curious. And there's also a link to buy my book on Amazon or through local booksellers. And I'm also on Instagram at Attuned Exercise. But the best way to get everything is the mailing list.
Amazing. I got to get that workbook. I'm going to sign up. That's
Yay!
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martha, for sharing your wisdom and coming on the show.
No, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.